Jonah lost his sight at 12 when a mule kicked him in the face. He learned to play fiddle because fingers do not need eyes to see. For 15 years he traveled alone, playing for whiskey and a floor. He slept in stables because no inn wanted a blind man inside. The livery in Willow Creek had a stable girl named Cora May. She was 19, plain and strong, with hay always in her braids. She heard Jonah playing one night from the tack room nearby. The song was about a river he had never seen with his eyes. Cora walked outside and sat on a bucket to listen properly. When he finished, she said that was the prettiest sound I ever heard. Jonah turned his head toward her voice and thanked her softly. She asked where he was sleeping, and he pointed to the hay loft. Cora said, "My pa owns this stable, and there's a spare room." Jonah said, "I have no money, only my fiddle and my hands." She said, "Then play for me every night, and the room is yours." He moved into the small room above the horse stalls that week. Every evening, Cora brought him supper and sat on his only chair. She described the colors of sunset she saw from the stable door. He played songs that matched her words, deep orange and soft purple. She learned that his other senses painted a world she could not imagine. He could tell her mood from the way her boots hit the wooden stairs. He knew when she was crying by the salt change in her voice. One night he asked why she was so kind to a blind stranger man. Cora said, "Because my brother went blind in the war and no one helped. He died alone in a ditch, and I swore to never let that repeat." Jonah put down his fiddle and reached for her hand in the dark. He said, "I'm sorry about your brother, and I'm glad you found me." She squeezed his fingers and said, "I am glad you found my stable." That winter, a drunk rancher came to hear Jonah play in the loft. The man mocked his blindness and tried to grab his precious fiddle. Cora stepped between them and punched the rancher square in the nose. Blood sprayed, and the man fled, yelling that she was a madwoman. Jonah asked what happened, and she described it with fierce pride. He laughed harder than he had laughed in 10 lonely years. He said, "You are the bravest woman I have ever not seen clearly." Cora blushed and said, "I cannot tell if that was a compliment or not." He said it was, because bravery has no face, only action and heart. From that night on, she took his arm when they walked to town. She described storefronts, dogs, children, and the sheriff's new hat. Jonah memorized every detail and played songs for each person they met. The town began to love the blind fiddler and the stable girl together. One evening, she guided his hand to a wildflower growing by the fence. He felt the petals and said, "This is what your skin must feel like." Cora stopped breathing and said, "No one has ever said that to me." He said then, "No one has ever touched a flower before, truly touched it." She leaned close and whispered, "Show me how to hear like you do." He placed her hand on his throat while he hummed a low melody. She felt the vibration and cried because music lived inside his bones. She said, "I have seen sunsets but never felt one until this moment." Jonah tilted his head and asked if he could touch her face carefully. She took his fingers and placed them on her cheek, her lips, her brow. He traced her features slowly, memorizing the map of her kindness. He said, "You have a small scar near your left eyebrow, Cora May." She gasped because she had forgotten that scar from a childhood fall. He said, "Your lips turn up at the corners, even when you are tired." She wept and said, "You see me better than any man with 2 eyes." Jonah smiled and said, "Sight is overrated when you have a good heart." That spring, a traveling doctor came through and examined Jonah's eyes. The doctor said he could operate, but it might fail or make things worse. Cora held Jonah's hand and said, "I will love you either way completely." Jonah told the doctor no, because he did not want to risk losing her. He said, "I already see everything I need through Cora's voice and touch." The doctor left, and Cora kissed Jonah for the first time gently. She tasted salt and fiddle resin and something like home finally. He whispered, "I have been kissed before, but never with such honesty." She said, "That is because I am kissing the man, not his eyes or blindness." They became engaged under the cottonwood tree behind the stable. Jonah played a waltz he composed called Cora's Haystack Heart. She laughed and said that is the worst song title in history. He said, but the music is beautiful, just like you, every single note. The preacher married them in the stable with horses as witnesses. Cora wore a clean dress, and Jonah wore his best wool vest. He walked down the aisle holding her arm, not the other way around. She said, I am the luckiest woman because my husband hears my soul. He said, I am the luckiest man because my wife describes my world. Their first year was hard because money came slowly from fiddle jobs. Cora worked the stable, and Jonah played at weddings and funerals. They saved enough to buy a small cabin behind the livery barn. Cora painted the walls yellow because Jonah loved the sound of yellow. He asked what yellow looked like, and she said, warm, like your laugh. He smiled and said, then yellow is my favorite color from now on. She taught him to garden by feeling the soil's moisture and texture. He taught her to play simple tunes on a second-hand mandolin. They made mistakes, laughed, and never went to bed angry together. One night, Cora asked if he ever wished he could see her face. Jonah said, I see your face every time you speak my name aloud. He said, your voice paints your smile better than any I could do. She cried into his chest and said, I hope our children have your ears. He laughed and said, I hope they have your nose for punching bullies. Cora gave birth to a daughter with wide, seeing eyes and dark hair. Jonah held the baby and counted her fingers and toes by touch. He said, she has your scar above the eyebrow. Cora, I can feel it. Cora checked and saw a tiny birthmark that matched her own scar. She said, you found something I would have missed with my own eyes. He named the girl Melody because music brought them together finally. Melody grew up guiding her father through fields and town streets. She never saw his blindness as a lack, only as a different way. One day she asked, Papa, do you miss seeing the stars at night? Jonah said, I feel the stars through the cold on my skin, little one. He said, your mother taught me that love is the brightest light anyway. Melody kissed his cheek and said, you are the best papa in the world. When Melody turned 10, Cora fell ill with a fever from the well. Jonah sat by her bed for 7 days, playing soft lullabies constantly. He never left, even when neighbors offered to sit in his place. He said, I may not see her color, but I can hear her breathing change. On the 8th day, Cora's fever broke, and she squeezed his hand weakly. She whispered, you stayed. And he said, I will always stay, blind or not. She recovered and kissed his eyelids one by one with grateful tears. He said, your lips are my sunrise, Cora, and you rise every morning. They grew old with their daughter, and then grandchildren around them. Jonah played fiddle at every wedding, birthday, and harvest celebration. Cora never stopped describing sunsets, and he never stopped listening deeply. On his deathbed, he asked her to hold his hand one last time. He said, thank you for seeing me when the world looked away from me. She said, thank you for teaching me that sight is the smallest sense. He smiled and stopped breathing while she whispered his favorite song. The camera holds on Cora placing a wildflower on his closed, peaceful eyes.